heading into the home stretch here, and thank you all for hanging in here. So we have a fabulous panel for you this afternoon on best practices and job accommodations. And so let me introduce all of our speakers to you, and then I'm going to let Robin take over from there. So first of all, Robin Jones. And wave your hand, there you go. Robin is an occupational therapist. She's the director of the Great Lakes ADA Center and an instructor in the Department of Disability and Human Development in the College of Applied Health Sciences at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And she will be our moderator for this session. And then we have here, starting...
I'm right here.
in my stack here. All right. So right to my right is Kevin Irvine. He's an experienced disability rights advocate and trainer who works at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago and is the senior talent acquisition consultant in individuals with disability. To his right is Tyler. Tyler, you gotta find your sheet here.
I'm also right here.
I know. So Tyler Rowland is a senior consultant in the Performance Improvement Group of the Advisory Services practice at Ernst & Young. And he serves as a product owner for a global cruise company. Oh, that might be interesting to talk about later. All right, so Pat. Stay right here somewhere. We have too many pieces of paper, that's the problem. All right. So Pat Maher is a senior strategy, relationship development and management and tactical implementation executive with extensive experience in startups. He is also wonderfully serving on the RRTC advisory board. Jean, I saw you here a minute ago. Here we go. If not, I know. Well, I'm glad you do. So Jean Maglio is a senior vice president at Northern Trust. She serves as the manager for employee relations North America. And before employee relations, she served as a senior human resources consultant in the corporate and institutional services and operations and technology business units. And last, but definitely not least, is Peter Lee. And Peter is the director of short duration fixed income and head of taxable credit research for Northern Trust Asset Management. He manages the team responsible for registered money market, mutual funds, offshore global cash funds, short-term investment funds, separately managed institutional client mandates, and securities lending cash and investment. His daily responsibilities are to develop and oversee strategies for cash management business, and he also manages the taxable credit research teams with fixed income. So I'll let Robin take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, and again, welcome everybody. The afternoon, it's hard. Thank you for sticking with us and still being here at this time when you've been here for several hours already, ups and downs and moving around and things of that nature. But hopefully the information that will be shared today by our panelists will be something that will have made it well worth your while to have stayed with you. So we're going to run this a little bit informally in that we're going to be asking some questions of our panelists, asking them about their specific company practices around reasonable accommodation with the intent that will give you some idea about what other companies are doing. It may be something you have an aha moment and think, oh, we're already doing that, you know, check. Or there could be something that's like, wow, that's something we should really be thinking about, and I'm sure that our panelists would be more than willing to share additional information with you afterwards if you wanted to follow up with any of them about some of their activities and things of that nature. I think everyone up here would probably say they're not perfect. Everyone would probably say they probably have things that they're not doing correctly, that they could do better and such of that nature. So they're here really to share with you honestly about what is going on and kind of even may give some of their own self-critiques along the way. So that's kind of what the point is here, is that this is a safe zone and a sharing zone for information for all of us to exchange. So I'm just going to go ahead and start out here with some questions and ask them to give us a little bit of information. But Jean, could you give me some idea about how you and your company actually manage accommodation requests? And then do you play any direct role, or pooling organization plays that kind of a role?
Sure. So we do have a group that is responsible for medical accommodations for Northern Trust partners in North America. It's not mandated by law in the other regions that we are, but we help them too by sharing information and processes and procedures. And I have 2 people on my team that are directly responsible. One is more junior than the other. The other one had done this in a previous life in another company. So it's great because she came right in with experience, and the process is as simple as making sure that our name is out there so that people know who to go to if they have a medical accommodation need. And it's a very interactive process. I'm sure you're surprised at that. So it's a lot of back and forth in terms of they make a request for an accommodation. We have them go seek their medical professional's advice. And then the process begins back and forth, and we get them so that they're comfortable while at work and able to do the essential functions of the job.
Can I just ask you a follow-up? Is the process that you say of requesting accommodation, is that done through an online process, or is that done something, you have a formalized process, as we heard our presenter this morning talk a little bit about that, different methods and things of that nature? What's yours?
So we have a formalized process. And the 2 individuals and myself have access to that. I rarely go in. I rely solely on them. It's a case management system, and it has all of the communications back and forth. I give some oversight to the consultants to, back and forth when they might need to get someone from legal involved and so on. But by and large, we're going to try to do what we can to help the person be successful at work.
Tyler, could you tell me what EY might do, and is it any different, or is it similar, and what's your process?
Yeah. So we're very similar. Our accommodations office is comprised of 2 directors and then an assistive technology expert, Kevin. They are responsible for all of the medical, ergonomical, and technological accommodations that we provide. We have a formal process as well, and after that, as you fill out the form and you get started, then it's a lot more interactive based and back and forth through conversations. We start with our talent consultants, which are kind of on the ground HR representatives working with the individual. That goes with the request up to the accommodation office. They perform their diligence, and then we also send off for a medical authorization form to receive how the accommodation might affect the impacts of the task for the job. And then at the end, it's a holistic conversation with the individual, the accommodations office, and anybody that might need to be informed, such as like the engagement manager.
Great. And Kevin, any differences, and you have a kind of a different model a little bit at Rush with your position in HR and stuff that nature, so just curious as to what your process might be.
Sure. So again, Kevin Irvine, and I'm in the HR recruitment team at Rush. And I've been at Rush for about a year, so I'm still learning. Rush is a pretty large organization. But my role is to recruit individuals with disabilities for jobs at Rush, but also work on some disability inclusion initiatives at Rush. And part of that was kind of segues into the accommodation issue, which is we started a disabilities employee resource group this year. And so part of what I've been trying to do is to raise awareness of our group, encourage employees at Rush who have various disabilities to self-identify and to get more people involved. And from the people that have come to the Disabilities Employee Research Group, one of the issues that they said they wanted to work on was reasonable accommodations. Because we have a process right now that is in flux. We're literally in the process of changing it right now. So I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but it had a form you had to fill out as an employee that was just, it was a pretty decent form. I think it was came from Job Accommodation Network possibly. But then you had to turn that in with medical documentation from your physician, and then you had to go to employee health and get their medical support for an accommodation request. And it's a little bit over medicalized, and there were kind of a few too many steps. And so now we're working on trying to simplify it and just make it so it's not quite as burdensome on the employee. And then I'm also trying to figure out some things, integrate the feedback from the employees with disabilities at Rush into ways to make it smoother and go more, flow more easily. We don't have corporate credit cards, so purchasing accommodations is a little more complicated. We have to get invoices, and so it kind of slows things down a little bit. But this is all in flux, and I think that that's one of the benefits of having an active disabilities employee resource group is you've got people who are engaged, have gone through the process, who can give good feedback about how to make your system work even better. So I'm excited to see where we can go with that. And it's really, I think it comes from both the support for disability inclusion from the top at Rush, but the ideas, I think, the best ideas are going to come from people that have already gone through the process, who have ideas about how to make it better.
And Pat, anything to add related to SBR or the process that they use?
So I'm actually, my formal role is Director of Civic Engagement for SPR. We're a digital consultancy in Chicago and Milwaukee, and much smaller than the other organizations. So Robin, I'd say at SPR, this is developed more organically. I've been with SPR for 15 years. I directed a channel called Enablement for a decade, and we were targeting the disability population into the tech sector. So at this stage, as my role has expanded, I mean, independent of that, HR is very familiar with ADA Title I process. They exceed to that. But I'd say at SPR, it's more the culture that has developed because we're 300 total personnel and many of them are at client sites. And obviously we're spread between Chicago and Milwaukee, predominantly Chicago. But we've, over the years, presented or offered quite a few accommodations, both physical, process, scheduling, etc. So I think at SPR, we've had growing comfort over time with recognizing the value that our colleagues with disabilities present and offer. So that's, I think.
I mean, obviously, definitely a contrast between a big company, across the country, as you have, Northern Trust, and with EY, to more of a local, large medical system, as we have in Rush, because you have multiple sites as well, but mostly in the Chicago area and such, to a much smaller situation. You can see the flex that, it has, and that they're all looking and changing, and potentially it's a dynamic process, trying to figure out how to do it better, how might be able to do it better, and I appreciate the feedback you give. It sounds like everyone is still working on those types of things. So let's, we've got the application process, we've got the request process in place and stuff of that nature. Kevin, could you share an example of someone that you've worked with, either somebody as a potential applicant, since you are involved in the recruitment side of things, but also maybe somebody who's already working there, maybe somebody from your employee resource group, or somebody who's not a part of that, but who's maybe approached you because they're feeling maybe safe, where they may not in the past having somebody to talk to, about how you work with them on a reasonable accommodation request and process?
Sure. I think there was, we had one applicant who was deaf and used American Sign Language and needed sign language interpreter for the job interview. And fortunately, we have a pretty robust interpreter services program, because we're used to getting interpreters for not just sign language interpreters, but for all the different languages for the people we serve at Rush. So that was. It connects really well with getting sign language interpreters for accommodations. And so in that case, that person needed it for the interview, but then also when they were hired for the new employee welcome orientation and for the training that they had to do for their job. So it was one of those things where we didn't have a lot of experience having sign language interpreters on the job, but for employees, but we already had experience providing it for clients and patients at Rush, so it made it easier. And then they had to work on figuring out when they would need interpreters when they're doing the job, and figuring out systems so that they could communicate when they're on the floor, seeing patients with their supervisors or other coworkers. But again, I think the hiring manager didn't have experience with providing these kind of accommodations, but was very willing and open, and worked well with the employee in figuring it out. And that person's doing well.
Great, it's good. Jean, could you give an example from somebody that Northern Trust has accommodated or?
Sure. On average, we do about 450 accommodations per year in North America for our employees. And we've got Peter Yee here, who's going to talk about his return to work.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so whenever you have some of these life-changing events in your life, there is some fear around what it's going to look like on the other side in terms of going back to work and engaging with kind of some of the things that you were used to in your prior lifestyle, that is. And Northern Trust has been incredibly supportive. Ever since I actually had my accident, and I'm a C5 quadriplegic, in my mind, I actually never questioned whether I was going to go back to work. It was just in what capacity and how the accommodations would be working. And really from the minute I had an opportunity to kind of reconnect with Northern Trust, they gave a lot of resources. One of the first things that they asked were, what are the things you need to do your job? And that's where I did a little research, and with the help of Shirley and AbilityLab, I was able to just kind of look at what's out there from an assistive technology perspective. And bottom line for me was I didn't necessarily need anything that was going to be entirely sophisticated or some real robust tools. All I really needed was like a dictation product, that was explained earlier with Dragon, having some accommodations within my own workstation. My office was totally reconfigured with a movable desk. I have an adaptive mouse. I have doors now that will open with the push of a button. Now, those things weren't there, but when I asked for them, seemed to be reasonable requests that were put in place pretty quickly. We did spend time before I went back full time just to kind of assess my workplace, my office. I took a walk with Jean around the actual sidewalks to make sure that there were access points and there weren't too many physical challenges in terms of getting from one place to the other. Turned out to be a really, positive experience. I'll say this now, and I really do believe it. I enjoy working. Every day I challenge myself to do something different, whether it's from a mental capacity, doing my job, or a physical capacity. And I might be jumping ahead here, but Northern Trust is giving me a lot of resources in terms of trying to get back to what I did before. And in fact, I'm actually took on more responsibility over the last year. And I have people that report to me around the world. I have people that report to me in Chicago and London and Bangalore. Again, I challenge myself to travel and not be afraid of traveling. And that was one of the big milestones for me a couple of years ago, was traveling domestically to see clients and speak at industry events that I used to do even prior to my accident. And then just as recent as last month, I spent 3.5 weeks in Europe, working out of my London office, doing some client work and conferences in Dublin. That was big for me, being kind of away in a different environment and a different office, and working with those people in my London office to ensure that there was accessibility, things that were going to benefit me over there as well. So that was a big milestone for me, and like I said, I challenged myself to ensure that I can do the job and do even more. So for me, it's been a fairly positive experience, and coming back to work has been really refreshing in terms of having the trust and gaining the same responsibilities, if not more, than I used to have. And so it does take a lot of collaboration. It does take a lot of buy-in from the business leaders, as well as people like Jean, to give us the accessibility and the special tools to do your job effectively.
Peter, if I ask you, from the time that you decided that you wanted to come back into the workplace, which is probably pretty soon after, you probably had a mindset all along, to you actually getting back into it when you initiated the process with Northern Trust, about how long before your accommodations and stuff were in place so that you could return at that point?
So it was a slow return. For 3.5 months, I actually spent that in the inpatient here in Shirley, Irvine. Even during that time, I was pretty anxious because I was bored. I didn't really want my skill sets that I've developed over the last decade to deteriorate. So I did want to have access to things like email, access to some of the same, tools and just reports that I was used to. And having access to email was pretty big for me. Because I get a lot of emails every day, and even though I wasn't, really in the right mindset to be responding and making major business decisions right after my accident, I still just kind of wanted to have the access. And so it started with just email access. Then, after 6 months, I started to kind of work with my boss, I guess. And we kind of slowly brought in 10 hours a week, then it became 20 hours a week, and I worked about half-time for about the first year after my accident, and then I decided to go back full-time 40 hours a week. And it started off with coming in 1 day a week and working from home 4 days, and it slowly kind of progressed now to going into the office physically 3 days a week and working from home 2 days a week. But it also was working with the business to make sure that I had the right tools at home to do my job effectively, just like the same assistive technologies that I have in the office. We want to make sure both workplaces, workstations were effective for me.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Pat, have you used accommodations yourself? You played kind of multiple different roles with SPR, but I'm assuming you've had to ask for some accommodations yourself. If you'd be willing to talk a little bit maybe about that.
Sure, I have, Robin. On the heels of Peter, my career seems, I'm quite in awe, Peter, of your career. That's outstanding.
He's a big deal. He
is. Yeah, I think you are a big deal. Although I have always felt I had a nice career. Thanks, you too. SPR has accommodated me. I've had several surgeries during the window I worked with SPR. So there's been a back to work accommodation. At this stage, my balance is somewhat compromised because I'm fused from mid-thoracic to my sacrum due to surgeries, and so I work remotely quite frequently. However, in my role, I'm at events off-site with most of my efforts in any case. So what I try to do, similar to Peter on some levels, is I'm in the office consistently 1 or 2 days a week, or I try to maintain that schedule. That way I can engage with colleagues consistently. SPR, like many consultancies, hires people on as contractors, as remote staff, and so it's valuable to be in the office with some frequency or regularity in order to meet people. So, and in my role as Director of Civic Engagement, which really ties to the culture, I think it's key that people know who I am, that colleagues are familiar with me. So I'd say in general, Robin, it's been, SPR has accommodated the opportunity for me to work remote. And at the end of the day, your productivity will flag if you're not capable of remote work. I have clear objectives that I need to maintain over time. So that is reflected in my work.
Great, thank you.
I'd just add on one
Yeah.
comment. I think visibility in the workplace is huge. Just the ability, you should push yourself to want to engage more with your colleagues. I think it creates so much more of a positive environment when you can connect face to face. And so, I encourage anyone that ever kind of asks me about my experience going back to work. It's a big deal if you can force yourself just to kind of come in and, again, make sure you have that visibility and don't be afraid. And, there's some people that just are way too comfortable just working remotely from home 5 days a week. I'd say you should challenge yourself to want to come in more often, more regularly. When I'm in the office, I am busy from the second I walk in to the second I leave, because I load those days with as many face-to-face meetings as I can to make sure that it's an effective day, it's a productive day. So I would say, do not ever, to that point, don't ever underestimate the power of just being able to be face-to-face with people, because visibility for me, I think, is one of the exciting things I look forward to when I re-engaged with Northern Trust to go back to work.
Great, thank you. Tyler, can you talk a little bit, you talked about the fact that you have this website process for the for the accommodations and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about the interactive nature of your process? Is it all back and forth by paper? Are there face-to-face conversations? What happens in that interactive process for requesting accommodations and addressing the need and the implementation?
Yeah, so I'll give you the typical UI consultant answer. It depends. Early in the process, it is digitized. There's a lot of paperwork that gets captured through the digital process, but then after that, it becomes more interactive, and a lot of those conversations, I think, happen over email or through our communication tools. We're a Skype for Business company, but then towards the end, I think the in-person conversations do happen, and they happen with the appropriate parties. So, as I mentioned, our talent consultants are our on-the-ground team. They'll be there with the person with disability. And oftentimes for us, it's not just about having that conversation internally. We're a service provider, so we're making sure that the accommodations are both for our clients here at Ernst & Young, but also for the clients that they're serving. And having that conversation with the vice president or whoever your client sponsor is on the engagement to say, hey, here's the situation, and here are the things that we're going to do to ensure that this person is the highest performing team member possible. And also, too, looking at the logistics of how are we ensuring that the staffing and resourcing of this person is appropriate. Travel, if there's any travel accommodations involved, making sure that is incorporated in the accommodation process as well.
Kevin, can you give some thoughts on that same issue from the perspective of Rush and your process as a more localized, not as global as EY is, but still a big organization, very diverse?
I think we've got one team at Rush that works on job accommodations, and I'm not really on that team. So I work more on consulting when someone's applying for jobs at Rush. If they need an accommodation, then it goes to one of our recruiters, and I can kind of consult in those cases. So in that experience, I just find it's really just brainstorming to figure out what accommodations the person needs and figure out how to make it happen. And most accommodations, most people don't need accommodations for disability when they're applying. And in most cases, the kind of accommodations people need are pretty simple, like a room with specific type of lighting, or being able to get assistance. The sorry, I'm blanking for a sec, but it's not complicated, and so that's the message I try and get out to the recruiters, is just to be open to accommodation requests, make sure people know that it's a really easy process when you're applying for jobs to request accommodations, and then if there's any question at all about how to respond, then pull those of us in that have some experience, and we'll help figure it out.
Do you ever get feedback from your business research group about the fact that they are satisfied or dissatisfied with the process that is present, since obviously many of them may be recipients of reasonable accommodation, either one-time or ongoing?
Well, that's what we're working on right now, is the members of the people that got involved in our employee resource group, our disabilities employee resource group, said that, that while there were some things that were working well about our accommodation request process, there were other things that weren't working as well as they wanted to see happen. And so that's why we're actively working right now on providing some feedback and working with the team that oversees accommodations to try and make the process work even better. So it's an ongoing thing, and so the commitment at Rush is there at the highest level. So I think it's just a matter of figuring out how we can evolve the process so that it works smoothly for everyone. And one of the things I'd like to work towards is something like and this is jumping ahead to best practices, but a centralized accommodation fund, because I think that's really where for large organizations something that makes the most sense. But you have to create it, you have to develop it, and so that's where I hope we go.
Jean, anything to add on that about relate to the interactive process and how you engage with people beyond just the paper or things of that nature?
So the form starts with the individual, and the individual then gets input from the medical professional. So we've got it all in one step, and then they submit that. And one thing that we learned the hard way is you immediately pick up the phone if you've gone back and forth twice in email. So it's real efficient, right, to do a form and get it in and, okay, go back and see what the doctor had to say, and then, okay, well, that all matches, that's good, here's your piece of equipment. But it rarely works that way. And so I once heard someone on my team, and it was a third or fourth phone call. And so we talked and said, next time, if after the second time it isn't right, let's start listening. So, and sometimes when you do, I remember one case very specifically, a more senior level role, and right in there the physician had said, can't make decisions, and a couple other things. And once I talked to her, I said, well, here's what your doctor said. That sounds like what you do, right? And she said, oh yeah, it is. And so then she had to go back to her doctor and have another conversation. So sometimes we'll hear something that maybe didn't come up in the conversation with the medical professional in terms of what they can and cannot do. So like the keynote speaker said this morning, a big part of what we do is listen and then go from there.
Very good, thank you. You started over right back here with the best practice over here, Kevin, but Pat, from the work that you've done and the things that you've done and stuff of that nature, have you seen, whether it's SBR or, in the work, because I know you do a lot of work, because people sometimes come to you guys because you're also training individuals for potential placement in positions and things of that nature at SBR. As a best practice that you've seen or that you think is something that shines or that stands out from that?
So, Robin, in the earlier breakout here, when Dave Rowland spoke of SIFAR's approach to culture and to being embracing of overall diversity and inclusion, or diversity, equality, inclusion. I think, and certainly my experience at SPR and with great companies, really, and we have had a lot of experience with Northern Trust. For example, years ago we placed many enablement candidates on Northern's help desk before it went global. And I think a consistent theme is that cultures are overtly welcoming of difference. And again, at a smaller company like SPR, that can happen fairly easily and organically, naturally. At, I think, larger organizations, it requires more consistent process and formality, but the result can be just as impactful. I'd say Northern's, or pardon me, Northern Trust culture has always been embracing. They created a BRG very early, and all of their outgoing collateral very clearly speaks to embracing difference, disabilities specifically. So I think I would suggest that culture is the hardest thing to influence in terms of embracing diversity, and it's one of the most critical things. So that's what I'd say.
Tyler, any thoughts or best practices that you are familiar with that you would share?
Yes, to piggyback off of Pat's comments, the culture piece, I think, I don't have statistics to back it up, but people are much more open to disclosing and receiving accommodations from people than they are entities, and people are at the heart of that culture. Oftentimes too, I think we look at the best way when you can change how people work, where people work, and when people work. It's a lot of the times will encompass almost all the accommodations that we provide outside of some of the tools and resources that provide them. So I think being flexible in your process is really important, and understanding what processes are there for safety and what ones are there simply because we need some guidance and how they can be done.
Just piggyback on that, I think it's kind of like universal design, where you design something to be accessible, but it really works for everyone. My friend Andy Imperato, I had him speak at Rush last month about, well, actually earlier this month, about his experience with bipolar disorder in the workplace. And one of the things that he was talking about in terms of accessibility and accommodations is when you look at a company and you say, okay, look at your top people, the people that are doing, doing the work that you think is the best. Do you want them to have everything that they need to be successful? Do you want them to be whatever adaptations or modifications they need to be successful? Do you want them to have those things? And then think about everyone in your company. If someone needs something, whether it's a flexible schedule or a certain environment to work in or a piece of computer equipment, you want them to have that. And so if you're making sure that everyone that works for you has what they need to be successful, that will include people with various disabilities. Some of them apparent, some of them not apparent. And I think that I'd like to move away from, thinking about best practices, I'd like to move away from having accommodations be something that's so specialized and seen as something very, in quotes, special, to something that is just, we make our employees successful by providing them with what they need and the tools they need to be successful. And for someone with a disability, that can include accommodations that are disability specific. But it's really about what do people need to do their jobs well.
Hold on, let's take Jean and then I'll
Okay.
go ahead, Jean, and now I'll give it to you.
I just wanted to add something to that. I think some culture's key, I agree, but to add something really practical steps. One would be that you centralize your budgeting so that cost is never an issue, right? So that goes somewhere where the manager doesn't have to sign off on it, the manager doesn't see it as an extra cost that they somehow have to cover in the budget, and it's taken care of. It's the right thing to do. It's how you do business. You set your people up for success. I would also find out, are there other things that you need that maybe aren't physical things or equipment type? Maybe they want a mentor, advancement in their career, talking to someone in that way. So I think that, and I know I had one more. I'm trying to remember if I can. So I'll give it back to you. Got it?
Thanks, Jean. Pardon me. So I think related to both Kevin and Jean's and Tyler's point, I have always pressed that reasonable accommodation should be seen as a productivity tool. It's a way of making your organization function more efficiently, more effectively, more productively. And to Kevin's point, if we look at productivity and the organization as a whole and improving the organization, then we'll look at our colleagues who happen to require a specific accommodation under Title I of the ADA as just one more productivity tool. Our software testing practice, our practice director, Nancy Castle, when she started embracing digital accessibility reviews, auditing, and digestible practices for our clients, she immediately added accessibility 508 or WCAG into the software testing life cycle. So we offer that out of course for our clients who engage with us in software testing. So I think that's a very reasonable, and it improves every organization to look at accommodation as simply a productivity tool.
You help me remember. Is this on?
Yep, you're on.
You help me remember what I was going to say, and that is that we are starting training. It's actually already started, and it's a 3-hour course for managers, not of people with accommodations, but all managers. And it's how to focus and manage the work and nothing else. So a lot of our accommodations involve work from home schedules, and our focus has become, okay, the focus needs to be on the work, not where they're sitting doing the work. And so that's a process that we're just starting to roll out to help managers know how to do that.
And I think you bring up some really good points, all of you do, and you kind of, there's been a theme here about the university design and things like that. I had the pleasure yesterday of listening to, for anyone maybe familiar with the individual name of Greg Pollack, he is the Vice President of HR and Accessibility Officer for PNC Bank, which is a huge, obviously, another financial entity and stuff. And he talked about how what they found in the looking at what they're doing, because they've really embraced it nationally, internationally, et cetera, through their efforts and stuff, is that what they've done for employees has also improved their customer experience. Because what they found is that many of the things that their employees were reporting that were problematic and things of that nature were also things that when they fixed them or when they addressed them or paid attention to them, made their customer experience better, whether it was somebody with disability or not. But by simplifying things or adhering to accessibility standards and things of that nature, that they got a lot of feedback across the board, not from just somebody with a disability, but from the general public about that usability and such that factor. And it was all attributed to the work they were doing in accessibility, but it was having a much farther reach. And I think that's really powerful bottom line selling scenario. And he says that's what resonates with the board and the stockholders and things of that nature, is what's that bottom line? What's the cost effectiveness? Not just that it feels good, it's not a charity thing. He was really important to make that doing disability stuff is not a charity thing. It's about business. It's about the bottom line. These are customers and such. And so it was really an interesting perspective and puts a different light on it when you think about it. It's not just about what I do internally, but how I affect people externally and how that resonates into other aspects of my business, not just my employee side of the business as well. So very good. If you could, maybe each of you, talk about, if you thought about it, what is the number one lesson that you or your organization has learned through this process of inclusiveness, of accommodations and such? Is there a lesson that you have learned that you would impart? I mean, you shared a lot of little pearls of wisdom here up there, but if there's something that you would impart that you would take away as a lesson that, we learned this and, take it forward, that would be great. So I don't know, Jean, you have the microphone on your hand there if you want to start.
Mine are so minor, so they seem silly, but patience, because it's a long process. And so anything that you can do to really listen to the employee and to articulate your process so that they understand that it's a back and forth and that their participation is required. And if we don't get the information we need them to advocate for themselves so that we get the information so that we can help them. So patience is key and listening.
You know, one of the, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but what I have gathered is everyone is different. Everyone has different accommodations that they may need. You know, for example, everyone has, you know, may not necessarily need a Dragon dictation software. They may need a special keyboard. You know, some people may be able to open doors and some may not. To Jean's point, I think there's a lot of listening that needs to happen. Like I said, one of the first things that I did when I returned physically into the office to work was being able to walk around the building, walk through the halls, walk into my office, and take a look and make the assessment together in terms of what makes sense. And again, for me, even being quadriplegic, I didn't really need any real sophisticated adaptive equipment. I just needed things that would give me access to my computer, access to my phone, and access to people. Make sure that there's no real barriers to, you know, just getting in front of people and, you know, being able to connect with them. And again, I talk about visibility, which I think is critical. Those are the things that I guess I focused on and resonated more for my particular situation.
Pat, thoughts?
So I would somewhat echo what Jean and Tyler referenced earlier. Flexibility when you're engaging, or flexibility and engagement. And that gets to Jean's point about listening. And frankly, to Peter's point about every situation is unique. Frankly, every colleague is unique, right? I mean, with or without a disability. So I think communication is key, and recognizing flexibility and looking to support the mission of the organization. And I think that way accommodation and colleagues with disabilities will be perceived in a new light.
And you kind of stole my thunder earlier, Rob, but I think it's the impact that it has on not just your company culture, but your client relationship. Relationships are so important to us at Ernst & Young. And I'm a member of the America's Accessibility Steering Committee, which is our disability employee resource group. And we made it a priority for everyone on the committee to get business cards in Braille, which is an option our firm offers. And I can't tell you the number of times I've handed someone my business card and their face just lights up, like, oh, this is in Braille. I'm like, yeah. Accessibility is important to us at Ernst & Young. It just starts a whole new conversation because now you're connecting with people on a human level, not just a business level. And when you're in the business of relationships like we are, that's really powerful.
Excellent example too, because we get those same kind of remarks.
So when I started Rush about a little over a year ago, and my disabilities are non-apparent most of the time. I have hemophilia B, bleeding disorder, and HIV. And when I started Rush with kind of a pretty big goal to both recruit people with disabilities, but also to work on disability inclusion throughout our whole system, I was thinking, well, where are all the other people with disabilities? I know that we're there. I know there's many of us there, but most of us, you can't tell. But Peter, you're a bit of the exception, in that it's more noticeable. And so people that are with visible disabilities are easier to find. And so I felt like we really need to raise the visibility. And I think that I set out with a goal, like, let's increase awareness in both. I think it's going to help recruitment, but I also think it's going to help with accommodations and just raising awareness about the diversity of the disability experience at Rush and all, in employers. So we, to start our disabilities employee resource group, I said we need to show people already at Rush to kind of give people the idea that this is who we are and we're here. So we did a video. So if you can cue up the video, that'd be great. And this was really to help launch and raise awareness about our disabilities employee resource group before we'd even gotten started. But it turned out to also be a great showcase for different people with different disabilities and the accommodations that they have at work that make them successful. And so I think we're using it, it's on our recruitment page, jobs@rush.com/disabilities.
We are...
Anyway, so I'm gonna, it really will speak for itself, but so I'll go ahead and play it. Thanks.
An organization and a healthcare system that really tries to reflect our communities that we serve. One of our goals at Rush is for everyone to feel comfortable being who they are and living their truth.
Here at Rush, I'm an information systems analyst, an associate information system analyst. And what I do is if a provider, nurse practitioner have issues with their software for these medical records, I'll go and I'll help them figure out what the issue is. My struggle is PTSD and anxiety. It comes and goes, and you'll see my eyes get a little glossy. I can sit there and have a small issue, and then a coworker will walk by and they'll see I'm struggling a little bit, or just staring at the computer. And I say, hey, Sandra, you okay? You need some help with something? The accommodations that I can say that I've received is several times of the training that I get, because it's hard sometimes for me to focus.
I was the first interpreter to be hired here at Rush, and kind of part of my role was to develop interpreter services. My disability is rheumatoid arthritis, and that kind of comes and goes. I could be fine for a month or two, and all of a sudden one morning I wake up and it's hard for me to either move one of my joints, either my hands, my knee, my toes, but the major one is my jaw. I have an accommodation in my work area where the monitors have to be higher. I have a special keyboard and a mouse that was very easy to obtain.
I am a palliative care registered nurse. Our outpatient clinic serves oncology patients at the cancer center. I am low vision, which means that I do not have correctable vision. And so in the workplace, I've made accommodations so that I can be successful. I currently use a magnified computer at my own desk. And then I also have a laptop that I use for meetings, and I use it when I go see patients, and that's also magnified. And one of the tools that's been very helpful to me is the iPad.
So Rush decided to establish an employee resource group just for employees like myself with disabilities. We have lots of employees with a variety of disabilities. Most of us have disabilities that are non-apparent. And an employee resource group is a great way for people to get together, share information about their perspective and their opinions, share resources. It also can aid in our recruitment efforts. If we have questions, we can ask other members of that focus group, and maybe they have an answer how they overcame certain things.
They allow the employees that have disability an opportunity to speak out and to talk openly about their disability without feeling ashamed.
It is drawing a diverse group of employees with disabilities, parents of people with disabilities, of people that are just really passionate about disability inclusion, and having all these people come together makes Rush stronger. I think it makes us better.
Thank you for sharing.
So having that video is a way of really, I think, helping to change the culture and raise the visibility, and I think that it makes it easier so that when someone does need to go up and ask for an accommodation, it's less exotic. And this is not something that we want people to think of as this is something that happens out there or over there. This is something that happens all around us. And so I think, when Peter, when you went back to work, it's visible, and people see that. And I think that one of the ways you change the culture is just to raise the visibility for all of us who are already there. And it makes it easier for people who are already there, and it makes it easier for new people coming on board, and I think it makes it easier for hiring managers to think about hiring people with disabilities. So I think changing the culture really requires visibility and requires disclosure for those of us in a position to do so. And so that's why I'm trying to find anyone at Rush with a disability, if they'd be willing to have their photo taken. They don't have to do a video, but they can have their photo taken, and we can feature it in our intranet site or on our external recruitment site.
Great, well, thank you. Thank you to our panel for sharing a lot of your insights and thoughts. And I think, we always just need to keep in mind, we as employers have been accommodating our employees forever. We've been making adjustments even before there were, disability as the context or whatever and thing. But suddenly when we throw a label or something on it, sometimes it changes the dynamic, or it causes people to think it differently and feel it differently because they see it as a compliance issue all of a sudden, and can get sued and all of those things. And we really need to break down that barrier and get back to where we look at it as, any kinds of accommodations for all of our employees makes everybody more productive. And I think that's been resonated several times here today about productivity being the bottom line. And that everybody has the ability to do the job if they're given the right tools to do that with or without a disability. And as a company and a culture, we want to change that. As I think back, as we are approaching the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and we had the signing of the ADA back in 1990, one of the things that President Bush at the time said was, while we can mandate architectural laws and things about how buildings are built and such, the one biggest barrier that we have is attitude, and that's one thing that we can't legislate to do. That has to change by society and by all of us in what we do and how we do that. And I think this goes to starting that, and we 30 years in, and hopefully we're a lot farther along than we were then, but we still have some work to do. So as you move forward and look to celebrate your 30th anniversary, I hope in your companies and things of that nature, you're planning some events and activities and such throughout the year. Don't wait till July 26th of 2020 to decide you're going to do something for the 30th anniversary. Please start to be thinking about it now and planning, because it is a year-long thing. In fact, we're already behind because the 30th year started on July 27th of 2019. So you're already 4 months behind, so you better start catching up because it is a year-long thing, and we really would like to see a lot of energy in Chicago and beyond in your places around this particular issue. Before we turn it back over for wrap-up and stuff, I want to see if there are any questions that anybody had for anybody on the panel from the audience. This would be an opportunity if you'd like to ask them a question. I'm sure that they would be more than willing to respond.
Yes, I think Kevin has helped me earlier, and it may sound like a broken record to some people here, but when I used to apply for jobs and I have a disability with an accommodation, now I find the accommodation is not as difficult as my son, who has just graduated from a prestigious university, and he has an invisible disability, that when he's applying for jobs now online, some of them have the listing with the disability should you wish to disclose or not, and some do not. In some jobs he's decided since they have that he would put it, in others he has not. But the point is now the next step is phone interviews, which never occurred at my age. So I'm curious with, I know Kevin has been giving me information, but like with Northern Trust or Ernst & Young, the people then who go to the first point where they're interviewing someone just on the phone to see if you proceed to another interview, are they having access to that information? Because it seems that they are not. So the person who is maybe in charge, like Kevin, of the disability sector is not the person who's doing the initial phone interview. And so my son seems to think that, with his qualifications, and he gets so many phone interviews, but he never seems to go on to the next step. Because in his case, maybe he's on the autism spectrum, his voice is robotic. He only answers the question to answer the question. He doesn't go forward. And we are thinking that the people who do the first step phone interviews are not privy to that online information. Can anyone from one of the bigger companies address that?
So at Northern, we have multiple different ways that you can interview. We do phone, we do Skype, so it's a video. And I've worked with clients of Shirley Ryan in the interviewing phase, and with one who was very slow in speech, we practiced what she was going to say in the phone interview so that she could explain it in her own words, that it doesn't impact her mind or her ability to do it, but it does impact her speech. And the job was accounting. It doesn't require a lot of talking, right? It's numbers. And so I think it depends on the individual, but we, on our application, which you need to complete before you're going to get an interview, it says in there, during the interviewing process, do you need an accommodation? So it's a separate stage that we ask for accommodations, and then when they join, they're asked again. So there's two different steps, and if at that step, there's something that your son might need, let's say an in-person interview, I don't know what it would be, but that would be the appropriate time to say, hey, we might want to do this.
I would just like to also clarify, I think what your son is coming up against is that you probably apply to some organizations that might have obligations under what's known as Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act, which requires employers who have federal contracts of $25,000 or more to do a positive attainment goal of hiring people with disabilities of 7%. And part of that is to collect information about who their applicants are and who their employees are. But it is totally voluntary. So that information that he's clicking on there, that goes nowhere to whoever is dealing with the application. That is a numbers game in regards to, okay, we had 10 applications that came from people with disabilities, but I don't know that it was Joe Smith who clicked yes on that as the application.
Yeah, to add to what
So the person does not know they have a disability.
we pass on the resume. So that is what is sent to the hiring manager, just the resume.
Right, we don't have the other information.
Just to follow up on that. On the Section 503 thing, actually, I do find people that self-identify, and we do data mining. So in my job, because we actually want to recruit people with disabilities, so I actually, if someone self-identifies when they're applying, I can actually find them and boost the signal of their application. So we actually do that affirmatively, because that's what we want to do. And so, but it does not, it doesn't go forward. We just, I work with our recruitment team to say, make sure that you're giving these applications, all the scrutiny so that we're forwarding the qualified people. But for your son, maybe think about, he may actually need to ask for an accommodation of either an in-person interview as an accommodation for his disability, or just the accommodation of saying, understanding that he will speak in kind of a monotone and that he will answer specifically only the question asked, and that to ask that if the interviewer needs additional information to ask a follow-up question. And just say, I have autism spectrum disorder, I will respond like this, and I will answer exactly the question as asked, and no further. And that is an accommodation I think he could ask for. I think it would be an employer would have a hard time saying it's an undue hardship to do that. But that goes back to he's got to set the stage and ask for the accommodation that he needs to get beyond that. And I just want to add one more thing, is that the next wave is video interviewing, because we're starting to do that now for some roles at Rush. Is we'll send you a link, and you'll actually get a link to sit in front of the city your webcam, and questions will pop up, and you'll record on a video webcam answers to those questions. So that is kind of the next wave, and then a recruiter will see those answers. So just FYI, heads up.
Technology, good, bad, and indifferent. I won't be able to be in my pajamas when I do that, I guess.
Pajama bottoms.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Any other questions before we? Okay, Pat, over here. Sorry. She's getting her steps in today.
Outside of Northern, which sounds like they have a process, but does Rush and Ernest Young have a process for educating staff about your accommodation process, or how to request an accommodation, both your managers and your non-management staff? So like an employee who might already be working in the organization and acquires a disability, how do they know how to ask for an accommodation?
I do think that's an issue, and something we are working on, trying to get information about that, both in our new employee welcome orientation, but also for manager training, so that people throughout the system know. But it's an ongoing thing, and part of it is making sure people know about how you ask for accommodations. Another part is just making sure people recognize that they actually have a disability. Because there's a lot of us with various chronic medical conditions, and many people don't even recognize that they have a disability. And actually, you saw in the video my colleague Carlos Olvera, manager of interpreter services, and his accommodations at his workstation. Now, Carlos developed rheumatoid arthritis after he'd been working at Rush for a while, and he didn't recognize it as a disability. And so when he needed adaptations, because he ran this program, he just purchased it for himself. He didn't go through the accommodation request process. And it wasn't actually until I started working at Rush last year, and we became co-chairs of the Rush ADA task force, and we were talking, and he said, well, I have rheumatoid arthritis. Do you think I have a disability? I said, yeah, I think you do. You have job accommodations. You've got a modified workspace. You have days when you can't work because of flare-ups of your rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, I think you have a disability. And so now he self-identifies that way. But literally a year and a half ago, he didn't. And he had workplace accommodations. And so I think that it is, there's an awareness piece that is so critical. And that is why I've just been doing everything I can to just try and raise the visibility for everyone with a variety of experiences. Because sometimes you need to see someone who's kind of like yourself. Someone whose experience is close to yours, to recognize that within yourself. And most people are not going to look at you, Peter, with your disabilities and recognize their own chronic health condition that they've had for 15 years or maybe even their whole life, that is a disability. And in Carlos's case, there was actually someone that's also been on our ADA task force for years, and they've been in meetings together. And until Carlos did this video and she saw it, they didn't know that both have rheumatoid arthritis. And she'd grown up with it, and they've been in meetings for years. And so visibility is really key, but it's an ongoing process, and it takes a lot of intentionality.
Yeah, I couldn't echo enough how ongoing it is. The Accessibilities Network at Ernst & Young, that's one of the big things that we're trying to look at and improve upon. We've looked at everything from incorporating the appropriate materials and onboarding to even using UI Connect Data, which is our data service, as an opportunity to promote how to go about requesting accommodations. So I think looking at it creatively as opposed to just following the standard communication procedures.
As a colleague of mine once told me, who were talking about disability, said, Robin, when I became disabled, nobody gave me a manual about how to do anything. I have had to figure it out for myself, and I think that's the issue, is that there is no such thing. There's no cookbook for anybody. Become disabled, you suddenly read through this, and these are all the checklists that you do. You do rely upon the environment, you rely upon the people around you, and to give you that information and to help you find that information and feed that information. I think that's really an important piece to remember for all of our organizations. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you for sharing your information, your companies, maybe exposing a little here and there and such. That's the good part. I'm sure they'll be around afterwards if you have any individualized questions for them at all. But just get a round of applause here for our